What do you want a headphone to do? Reproduce the sound of live music or a great set of speakers? Or give you extra insight that neither live music or speakers can ever quite deliver? Maybe you want it all. I think Yamaha's engineers wanted to deliver it all with the YH5000 SE headphones. I've spent quite a few weeks getting familiar with the Yamaha flagship headphones, and I've needed every second of listening time to properly understand them. These are a $5,000 flagship headphone with brilliant design and mostly excellent ergonomics. They've got an impedance of 34 ohms and a sensitivity of 98 decibels per milliwatt, so they're also pretty easy to drive. But you won't want to waste these on a budget source chain because they need a little bit of help. I'll explain that in a moment. Before we talk about the sound a bit more, let's talk about the design of these. Firstly, I think they look really cool, but that's probably more subjective than sound quality. They're also very light at just over 300 grams, and they're pretty comfortable as a result. Maybe not quite Meza Elite or Susvara Unveiled comfortable, but still excellent. When you look inside, there's a big distance between the face of the pad and the back of the cup where the driver is, and I think that's helping with one of the impressive aspects of their sound. It also means they look pretty cool on the inside. And by the way, the driver you can see in there is a planar magnetic driver, or isodynamic as Yamaha call it. It's the same thing, that's their trademarked version of a planar magnetic. The final element of the design is their headband system, and that's the fly in the ointment for me, probably the one and only when it comes to their design. It uses a simple slider mechanism for adjustment, and that's nice and easy to use for adjustment, but the demo pair that I have here has gotten a bit loose, and so I get them to just what I think is right. I put them on my head, and this side slides all the way up, so I have to kind of fix it again. And so I suspect that means that those sliders will get loose over time, and you may be in the same position as me, where you put them on and you have to then readjust them. Once it is readjusted on the head, it tends to stay where it is, but every time you take them off and put them on again, you've got to readjust. Once you've got them on your head and you connect the lovely cable provided, which uses a pair of 3.5mm sockets on each headphone cup, you'll have a lot more to think about than the headband though, because you'll probably be trying to decide if you actually like the sound of the YH5000s. Or if maybe you hate them. I started out hating them. Before you think that these are just all bad, let me break the sound down a little bit more. And we also need to circle back and talk about source chains too. In other words, your choice of DAC and amp matters with these. One of the very first things that I noticed about the YH5000s is they deliver excellent bass. I have a pair of Final Audio D8000s here at the moment, subscribe for that review, and the D8000s are known for their fantastic bass quality. The Yamahas get mighty close to matching them. Where the Yamahas are better than the Final D8000s though, is the Yamis produce a wonderful sense of size and scale in the soundstage. That's both in terms of the width, but also the depth. Much like the Sennheiser HD800S with its angled and distant placed drivers, the Yamahas are designed quite similarly, and they deliver similar spatial qualities as well to the HD800s. Different tunings means that the HD800S and the Yamaha YH5000 are still very different sounding headphones, but there are some definite similarities in the way both headphones produce soundstage size and image placement. And so that's sounding pretty positive so far, isn't it? Well, not so fast. Unfortunately, and in direct contrast to what the Yamaha website says about the YH5000s, I find their tonality not particularly natural. I'd go so far as saying it's quite unbalanced at times. They have some significant peaks in the upper mid-range and treble that can make them sound quite wonky on some tracks. And I noticed on some tracks that I listened to with the YH5000s, they tended to make me as the listener focus on very specific sounds. In this case, the sort of sounds that are present when you can hear the singer and the distance from the microphone, and it draws your attention to the fact that you're listening to a recording rather than listening to a live performance. It's a bit hard to explain exactly what I mean in terms of exactly what sounds I'm talking about, but what I found was that time and time again, listening to the YH5000s, I would find myself visualizing the singer and the microphone and how close or far apart they were, rather than actually focusing on listening to the music and enjoying the performance. And with all other headphones I've tried around the price of the Yamahas, I haven't had that same experience. Now, you might love that presentation, so I'm not saying it's bad, but I prefer a more live type of sound. And then separate from that emphasis and focus on the vocal and microphone sounds, I also find that the general tonality of the Yamahas is just a bit too forward in the upper mid-range, and it makes everything just tonally sound a bit unnatural. Every time I put these on, my brain has to readjust to the sound and consider what it thinks is natural. And that's true even if the Yamahas have been the only headphone I've been using for multiple days on end. In other words, it's not a case of switching from one headphone to the next and having to adjust their sound. It's just coming from the real world to the Yamahas. The Yamahas sound a bit wrong. My brain does adjust, but it takes a bit of time. How this plays out on a particular track is that the Yamahas can sound a little bit harsh on a track like Creep by Radiohead, and that's particularly in the chorus where it gets a bit busier. But then on the other hand, they can actually sound lovely on a simpler track like Let It Go by James Bay. And so they can be a bit of a confusing mixture. Depending on the track you listen to, and the source chain as we'll talk about soon, the Yamahas can be a bit of a different beast. If we then start to talk about them in the context of their competition, things get even more confusing still. Not only can their tonality, that sense of forwardness and harshness come and go from track to track, but even their staging and presentation can change a bit too. On one track, they might produce a wonderfully precise and focused image in a huge soundstage. On another track, they can be a bit more muddled and hard to grapple with from an imaging perspective. Thinking about headphones like the 2022 version Focal Utopias and the Final Audio D8000s that I mentioned earlier, both of those deliver a richer and more full and natural sounding vocal. The Utopias in particular are more pleasing to my ears than the Yamahas, and that's thanks to their combination of tonal quality, soundstage depth, and image focus. Unlike the Yamahas, the Utopias never get muddled. And so, are the Yamahas a complete write-off? Should you just avoid them? I'm not so sure. I've seen some comments from people here on YouTube who really love the Yamahas, and I get it. Firstly, we're all different thanks to the shape of our ears, our heads, our torsos, and our ear canals, all of which create specific frequency response variations from one person to the next. On top of that, there are some things that the Yamahas do extremely well. They deliver excellent bass, as I've already mentioned, and by that I mean you get a similar feel and tactility compared to what you get from the Final D8000, but also with a little bit more weight than the D8000, a bit more presence in the bass, and I really like them for that. Also, for the most part, the sense of space and staging from the YH5000s is excellent. Really, their biggest issue is that upper mid-range forwardness and the sense of aggression that it brings on some tracks. A little bit of the treble too. And one of the solutions for that is the DAC and amp you connect them to. Some people will tell you that the Yamahas are picky with their amplification that they need, and that's sort of true. But what I mean by that is it's got nothing to do with the power output of the amplifier. You can destroy your eardrums with a pair of Yamahas and an amp capable of outputting about 50 milliwatts. I don't recommend testing that. What really matters for the Yamahas is they benefit from a richer and fuller sounding source chain. That's going to offset their tuning and help to balance them out a bit. Where that becomes immediately evident is if you connect the Yamaha YH5000s up to Yamaha's own flagship DAC and headphone amp. It's called the HA-L7A, and it's another review that's coming up that you might want to subscribe for. I'd be amazed if the YH5000s weren't tuned either using or with the L7A in mind. And that's because it has a rich, smooth sound that's a perfect pairing with the Yami headphones. Similarly, you could use an R2R DAC that's got a smoother, richer sound, and or a tube amp to help thicken up and richen up the sound from your source chain to balance off the tonality of the YH5000s just a little bit better. And now at this point, in case there weren't enough twists and turns in this video, I'd forgotten something about the YH5000s. They come with a second set of pads. Salvation? Would they sound better with the suede pads? Or damnation? Would they sound more unbalanced or somehow worse? It's actually somewhere in the middle. The tonality, to me, improves when you swap from the leather pads to the suede pads. The upper mid-range hump goes away with the suede pads, and it improves the general tonality of vocals. On You're My Home, running from the LAIV or Live, Harmony DAC and HP2A headphone amp, the suede pads bring a sense of warmth and richness that's in direct contrast to the crisp and detailed sound from the leather pads. Unfortunately, the treble doesn't change at all with the suede pads, and so the upper end is still pretty energetic, and it's now in even greater contrast to the mid-range because of the deeper 2 kHz dip before the treble spikes arrive. It doesn't make it bad, and if you're already comfortable with the treble that the YH5000s deliver, you'll be fine with the suede pads. But I found that the treble was a bit more noticeable again on the suede pads because of that sense of contrast. As I listened more and more, I started to think that the Yamaha headphones were better with the suede pads. But eventually, I realized that you're just trading one issue for another. Neither issue is big enough to be a deal breaker, but both pad setups take a bit of brain adjustment to get used to and could be off-putting for some listeners. I've already mentioned the slightly unnatural tonality of the leather pads, and that is largely fixed by the suede pads. In return though, you get a sound with the suede pads that can get a little bit too thick through the mid-range. Swapping back from the suede pads to the leather pads had me really appreciating their sense of clarity and detail compared to the suede. But it did have me lamenting the overly forward upper mid-range on a male vocal like in She's All I Got. In other words, you have to kind of pick your poison with the Yamaha headphones. Neither poison's going to kill you, but it also means that maybe neither's going to taste particularly good. I think for me, I would probably choose the clarity and detail of the leather pads and then find a nice, rich, smooth source chain to offset the tonality. And so could the Yamahas become, for me, a favourite headphone that I would recommend with the right source chain on them? Not quite. But that's less a reflection on the quality of the Yamaha headphones and more a reflection of the competition. In other words, there are some other headphones for the same money or less money that I think sound better, namely the Meza Elites and the Focal Utopias. But the Yamahas are not a bad headphone, and I completely get why some people enjoy them and even love them. I can especially see them winning people over with their spatial characteristics, much like the HD800s do. If these sound like a headphone for you, as always, I've put some links in the description down below to help you go and read up more and maybe buy a pair for yourself. I wouldn't for a second suggest it's a bad decision because I do understand the appeal here. But at this point, if you're not sure if these are the right headphone for you, then you definitely need to watch this video here where I compared the Yamahas and 5 other flagship headphones across a whole bunch of genres to see which flagship headphone was best for each type of genre. And the Yamis got the win in one genre and came pretty close in a couple of others too. For now, thank you to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you that leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.